Hello, my name is Tiffany Flowers, and I'm the campaign director of the Frontline. I am a dark brown skinned woman. I'm wearing red lipstick, eyeglasses with some color detail along the sides of my face, a bright orange sweater. I have sunflowers behind me and a pink wall, and I have long, colorful fingernails. So, who is the Frontline? The Frontline is a joint campaign between the Working Families Party, the Movement for Black Lives Electoral Justice Project, United We Dream, and the Rising Majority. Just so you know, before we get started, ASL interpretation is available on screen throughout the program, and you can find access to Spanish simultaneous interpretation by calling the number at the bottom of your screen. So, got our business out of the way. Why is the Frontline decided to celebrate the legacy of bell hooks all month long? Well, because as a recent ancestor of ours and someone who's meant so much to informing our work, our community, how we move through the world, and giving us framework for a Black feminist politic, we thought it was really important to stop, to pause, and to really give her work and her legacy and some honor. And so we wanted to take this month. We thought, what better time, Black History Month, right before Women's History Month, to really talk about what bell hooks means to us, means to our work, and what bell hooks taught us. So, with that being said, I'd like to welcome Dr. Takiyah Amin on screen, and Takiyah is going to introduce herself. Welcome, Takiyah. Thank you so much, so much for being here with us.
Hello and thank you. My name is Dr. Takiyah Amin. I am thrilled to be here with the Frontline. I am a light-skinned Black woman with a nose piercing. I have on purple cat eye glasses, a yellow headband, and a blue sweater. It's really an honor to be here, and I'm excited for the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you. I want to jump right into it because an hour never seems like enough, particularly once we start talking about bell hooks. So, first question we're asking everybody we talk to this month: when were you first introduced to bell hooks?
It's an interesting question. As I was reflecting on it, I should say that my mother was a public school educator. She taught English and drama in the Buffalo public school system. And my father was a security guard at our big main branch public library. My father has passed on. My mother is still living in Buffalo, New York. Um, but both of them had a real love for Black history, Black writing, Black scholarship. And so I can remember very young that her books were on the shelf in my home. They
Mm.
were just a part of the fabric inside of my house. The first time I ever remember reading any bell hooks for myself was either late high school or early college when I was getting interested in how to articulate my own feminist politic and stumbled into her Feminism is for Everybody. And that sort of began my personal one on one love affair with her writing and scholarship that was also reignited later during my doctoral studies when I was pursuing my PhD work at Temple University and a certificate in women and gender studies. We read lots of hooks at that time.
Mm. Temple University. Shout out to Temple. I'm a Temple Owl.
All right, owls.
All right, owls.
Really?
Owls. And that's actually where I got introduced in a class with Dr. Na Dove in the Black Studies department. Actually, the Black woman.
Yep.
Yes.
I remember taking that class when I was at Temple, but I remember Dr. Na Dove from working, she worked in Buffalo, New York for a bit on something we call the African Infusion Project, helping us to infuse Black content across curriculum. So yes, love to Mama Na.
Shout out to you, Dr. Nada, wherever you are. You're still in my heart, and thank you. Thank you for that impression and that lesson. So, next question: how does Bell Hooks's work help us make sense of the concept of love?
Oh, there's so many ways to enter into that question. I think what I would say is one, she both helps us think about our relationship to love in deeply personal ways while also depersonalizing it. And by that, I mean, she wrestles it from this Western framework that often only lifts up erotic love as value,
Mm.
right? So, yes, Hooks writes about love and interpersonal relationships, but Hooks also writes about love as a grounding principle or factor that shapes and contextualizes all of our relationships, not just parent to child or between lovers, but how does love enter into the conversation when we think about our relationship with community?
Mm.
How does love show up between an educator and a group of learners when they are developing a safe space or a brave space for the exploration of some topic? How do we think about love as fundamental to our wellness as Black people, given that we move so often through a society that is openly anti-Black and hostile, not just to our thoughts or to what we create, but also to our very being?
Mhm.
So there's a way in which Hook's writing on love, which is vast and deep, um, encourages us to think about our personal relationship to love. How have we been taught to think about love? How have we been taught that love behaves? What have we been taught or perhaps mistaught about love?
Mm.
And also blows it up to this broader kind of encompassing framework that we can think about operationalizing in all of our relationships.
Man, does it. You again, an hour never seems like enough. So sticking with the theme, right, of the personal and the
Mhm,
personal love and what it means to us. As a Black woman, you and I, Black
mhm,
women, know that love is a tricky thing, right? In all the ways that you talked about it
mhm.
manifests in our life. So why was it so crucial to have a Black woman writer, a Black woman writer and feminist, spend
Right.
a good deal of her time talking about explicitly love?
Well, I think there's a lot to that. I mean, one, there's sort of this anti-intellectual streak that shapes a lot of public discourse in this country, and a lot of, I want to say, misinformation
Mhm.
about what counts as a feminist concern, right? People who identify as feminists broadly are often stereotyped or painted as being harsh, loveless, um, uncompassionate, bloodless individuals who are sort of out of touch, right? And so to have one of the foremost public scholars and vocal Black feminists saying, I'm going to take my time to write and speak and teach and talk about love, flies in the face of a lot of those stereotypes and assumptions about what makes a feminist or
Yeah.
what is a legitimate feminist concern. I also think it was critical to have Hooks talk about love at a time that we began to see the ground shifting around the relationships that Black folks had in community. If you think about uh, sort of post civil rights, the way that folks classically like to think about that. I mean, I like to say civil rights is not an era. But if you think about kind of late 70s and into the 1980s, when Black folks had gained certain things in a socio-political frame, the relationships between communities were different. People were moving away from hometowns for work. We had another wave of migration. The relationships between Black men and women were beginning to change, not just romantically, but professionally, given the gains that Black women were starting to have in the workplace. And when we see increased media representation about Black people, Black families, Black relationships, the ways in which our relationships were presented or pathologized,
Mm.
all of that created a space where somebody needed to be lifted up, a radical critical discourse about love, and invite us to think critically about it in all of its dimensions. So I think it's just that Hooks is one of those public scholars that always had her heart amongst Black people and her finger on the pulse of our concerns,
Yep.
and chose to center her writing, research, and scholarship in that way.
Yep. Positively, lutely. No, I mean, that's so right. I'm enjoying this conversation so much. There's so many nuggets. I'm just processing as you give them and
Mhm.
share them all with our
Mhm.
audience. So sticking
I'll
with
just add really briefly too, that also includes the writing she did for children. Right? Some
mm,
folks forget that Hooks authored several children's books in her career, in addition to her other work that is often seen as more scholarly or critical. But even when she was writing for young audiences, she still centered the same set of concerns around Black love and Black life, which I think is um, an exceptional gift to us.
Black love, Black life, and something that keeps coming up in this conversation, and I'm reminded of when I think about her, right, is always overcoming our colonized minds and our colonized ideas of love, right? And
Mhm.
so when she talks about often in All About Love, all meaningful relationships, not just romantic bonds, um, that really feels so, I don't know the word I'm looking for. Just so applicable to the time that we're living in right now, right? And how much love is missing. So, how has that way of framing love served us in this moment? Us, our
Mhm.
community, the people that we're serving, the people that we live in love with, especially as we're still in the midst of this pandemic.
Well, I'm hopeful that it reminds us, it's sort of this question that gets brought up in certain religious or spiritual spaces about, do you truly want for your neighbor what you want for yourself? And in a moment where I know many of our people feel abandoned by larger government structures or services that are supposed to be available and supportive, as I see people turning toward and developing networks of mutual aid, which has a deep history amongst our people, as I
Mhm.
see folks making an effort to check in on their neighbors, both close distance and far distance, as I see folks choosing to mask up and maintain social distance, less because they are concerned solely about their personal health, but also about the health of those that they might encounter, right? That gives us a way of thinking about how we operationalize love, how we operationalize care. At the same time, I would be remiss not to lift up that one of the frustrations I have is in the way that I'm hearing some folks talk about freedom and talk about or invoke liberation, it's very clear to me that their vision of freedom or liberation does not have a love ethic implicated in it. In that, the emphasis is all about what they are free to do. It's all about what they can do to satisfy their own pleasures, desires, or urges without any care or concern for how that impacts the world around them. And I think Hooks brings us back and reminds us, if we let her, right? If we let her, if we study her writing, um, that we share this planet with each other, that we have responsibilities to the folks we are sharing the planet with now and those who will come behind us, and that centering love as the space from which we make our decisions about how to move leads us to making choices that, while they might not center our immediate pleasure, lend themselves to a greater good for us all in the end.
Oh my goodness. Couldn't we all use more of that lens applied to
Mhm.
everyday life in this moment? I
Yeah.
mean,
I mean, with the recent with her recent transition, which was a shock to so many of us, myself included, first I was hurt, and then I thought to myself, I hope this makes people who didn't read her. Especially because, Hooks was one of the first authors that I remember I could talk to people about who weren't academics.
mhm.
Right? That there were people who, well beyond the academy, were not interested in higher ed, which is sort of my wheelhouse and the universe that I'm in. But many of them were familiar with her work or with her writing in some way. And that's a beautiful thing. Not every scholar develops a career where they are able to move and do in that way. So I hope that we're in a moment that makes people want to learn more about her and certainly engage her writing, because I've never not found her work timely.
That is exactly right, and, that's a big part of the motivating factor behind why we're doing this month because, A, the community that she built with her work, right? And that it transcends so many things, in our society, 1. 2, the shock and the hurt that the community felt, and the fact that we haven't been able to, as we were talking backstage, gather, hold space, and do the things that we know how to do to make ourselves feel okay about this level of loss and shock.
Mhm.
And lastly, right, we really wanted to build people's curiosity. You've heard people talk about bell hooks, you've heard the community grieve and share, but like we really hope that people's curiosity will be piqued and they'll get into the readings and really learn more about why we think this author and this sister and this scholar is so important. So the final question I have for you.
Mhm.
Love is profoundly political, is what Bell said. So do you think this is missing in the current political conversation? Like, what is love's place in our political and social movements? I heard you touch on it just now
Mhm.
about freedom dreams, but could you expand
Mhm.
on that?
There's a lot of ways to enter into that, but I think what I would lift up is that when we think about political lowercase p, we're talking about discourses of power, right? And if we think about, in terms of political relationships, who has been invested with formal power, right, in terms of elected officials and that, and then those of us who are living and moving and having our being impacted by those systems, but not necessarily invested with formal power in those systems. I think the love that is missing is one that lifts up the fact that there is no way out of this life, right? Like, none of us gets to leave this life with our money or our amassed intellect or other material gain, right? And so, how are we building a socio-political future that invests in the greatest amount of good for the largest amount of people, that sees as its point of departure creating a society with a social floor that we refuse to let people fall below? What does
Mhm.
it mean to have political engagement that really centers the needs of those who are experiencing poverty or other realities that place them at the margin and perhaps not at the center of most kind of mainstream political thought? And so I think, if anything, um, the love we need is a love that is enacted by lifting up the policy concerns of those of us who have not been invested with formal power in the current systems in which we live. How do we lift up the concerns of our community that need to be addressed after decades and in some instances centuries of neglect? That's not something that love would do, right? Love is not interested in neglect. How do we build a society in which everybody thrives and not just a top 1%, a top 5%? And so I think what love asks us to do is to center ourselves in the idea that every life, and not just human life, but that every life has worth, dignity, and value, and to start there as a place of departure for how we then make policy decisions and address our global concerns.
Couldn't agree with you more. I mean, that's why we're going to talk about love and policy with and say UFA and Representative Presley, because we we know that that is the way, that that is how you live your values,
Mhm.
particularly when we get to a point of power and have those decisions that we can make for our communities. So, with our communities rather, not for, but
That's
with
right.
our communities.
I
So,
often tell people, you don't have to tell me you love me. You could love me through policy. That's
come
fine.
on now. I can read.
What, you love black people? Okay, let me see that from your policy choices. It's fine. You don't have to send me a Valentine. You could just
No,
enact policies that allow me to live and move and have my being in an unobstructed way.
and I'll feel it. I'll feel the love every day, right? You won't have to say the words. I'll feel it. That's right.
I will feel it. I will tell others. Let's go.
Maybe even be an evangelist. Dr. Takiyah, what a pleasure. I really can't thank you enough for your wisdom, for your thoughts, for your gifts, for your brilliance. So thank you so much for joining us. And tell the people, where can they find you? What is Dr. Takiyah doing on the internet? Are you around these streets?
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter. You can find me on Instagram. You can find me best at www.takiyahnuramin.com. All of my bona fides are there. You can contact me directly and learn more about the work that I do in the world as an academic success strategist.
Academic success strategist. The Frontline is bringing you academic success strategists. Go find Dr. Takiyah online, folks. As you can see, we just got a little nugget of her brilliance today, and there's lots and lots more to share. Dr. Takiyah, thank you so very much. We truly appreciate it.
Thank you, and I'm glad that you let me be here to be with you. It was really a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.
Our struggle for liberation has significance only if it takes place within a feminist movement that has as its fundamental goal the liberation of all people.
And now I'd like to welcome Ola to the stage. Ola, thank you so much for being with us. Thank you for joining us on the front line. Please describe yourself to the audience.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. My name is Ola. I am a set decorator for film and TV, a visual artist, a yoga teacher, a mom, and the creator and director of a social art project called the Free Black Women's Library. And the library features a collection of over 4,000 books, all written by Black women, Black femmes, and Black non-binary folks. And it also features different forms of public programming in form of like workshops, performances, cultural presentations, book discussions. We have a reading club, and we also have a mutual aid initiative for single mothers. So that's me. I'm
So
from
you're never busy.
and shout out to Brooklyn. I'm from Brooklyn, New York City. Boop, boop.
No matter where you are in the world, you know who's always in the building? Brooklyn.
Brooklyn.
Wow. Thank you for coming and sharing all your wonderful gifts and time. We know what a busy working person and mom you are. So thank you. Thank you for your time tonight on the front line. So I'm going to jump right into it. The question we're asking every single guest this Black History Month that we're celebrating bell hooks is, when were you first introduced to bell hooks?
So I had to think about this question for a while because I honestly feel like it was so long ago. It was at least over 3 decades ago. And it was most likely through her book, Ain't I a Woman? Black Women and Feminism. I was just in my Black feminism bag, like just stepping into that bag as far as like thought and theory and practice, and was reading a lot of Audre Lorde, June Jordan, but some of us are brave, learning about the Combahee River Collective and Bell Hooks's book. Many of her books, Feminism is for Everybody, they just popped up in my periphery, and I started reading, and I've just been a huge Bell Hooksian ever since.
All right.
I'm trying to read all her books. I feel like I've read at least 12 of them so far, but I'd like to read like everything she's ever written because I just think she's just so brilliant.
Come through, Hooksian. Yes, I never knew through this series that Belle wrote children's books. So now I'm very curious. I really had zero awareness, and that's exactly why we're doing this month, because we want to grow people's knowledge, awareness, access, and most importantly, right, like curiosity. But I'm going to stay off that soapbox. If go on.
No, it's definitely a good point, and I feel like it's an excellent gateway to her work, her children's books, Happy to be Nappy. She wrote that at a time when people saw nappy as a negative word, and she was confronting the idea. Like, she was ahead of her time, like right now we embrace naturals. We understand like natural hair is beautiful, but the idea of nappiness at that time, people weren't really into it. She wrote books specifically for Black boys. Ahead of her time.
A true Afrofuturist, like truly, yes.
Mm-hmm.
Which is what makes her work so exciting and always so contemporary and appropriate, right?
Exactly.
So staying on that, like, how does Bell Hooks's work help us make sense of the concept of love as you're coming into your Black feminist world understanding? And I'm sure love comes into that. How did that help shape it?
Well, Bell Hooks was one of the first Black feminist writers whose work I'd encountered who even talked about love in the work. A lot of the work I was reading was very politicized, very racialized, very gendered, and very theory. And she was bringing the practical work of love into it. So she talked about how living within heteronormative, racist, capitalist patriarchy, affected our ability to love. She talked about the differences between love and care, and how love is an intention and an action, right? And our politic often guides the way we choose to love and show love to each other. And she made it feel like showing love for other Black folks is actually like a very radical political act, because within this culture, within this society, and I'm talking about America specifically, there was this notion, like back when she wrote All About Love and like Sisters of the Yam, which is the 80s and 90s, there was this notion around like how Blackness and Black culture was really about survival, right? And was really about figuring out ways to keep ourselves safe, figuring out ways to avoid the most harm as possible. And often part of that work meant that we had to like suppress our softness, our tenderness, our emotions, our ability to show love for each other, because that could put us in danger, right? So she talks about like spanking and, you know, the way that romantic relationships manifest and friendships. Yeah, I'm not sure if I'm answering the question, to be honest, but I know that I feel like Bell Hooks is one of the few Black feminist writers and political theorists who actually sees love as like a project and an active and a political act. I'll say that.
Yeah, no, I want to affirm that I felt like you were answering the questions, because it isn't one answer, right? Like the work is so expansive that the answers are so expansive, and the language that she gave us to actually be able to name each parts of how. I think you did a wonderful job. So I just want to affirm, yes, you were answering, but I want to come back and hone in on what you were talking about as Black women, love being this tricky thing, and you know the work that we have to do to some of us, right, to outwardly practice joy, to take down some of these barriers, some of these fears, some of these learned behaviors that we're taught, sometimes through telepathy, sometimes through lived experience. And so,
Yeah.
right, as a Black woman, love is a tricky thing. So why was it crucial to have this Black woman, a Black woman writer, feminist, spend a good portion of her time really specifically focusing on love?
Well, she was shaking it up, right? She was waking it up. And I think part of the reason why it was crucial then, and it's still crucial now, is there's a constant devaluation of Black womanhood that takes place within culture. There's a constant dehumanization that takes place within our culture, whether it be through the media with film and TV, whether it be through state violence and what we experience under the carceral system, under the prison industrial complex, even within the health industry, you know, the way Black mothers are, the mortality rate of Black women dying in childbirth, the idea about us not experiencing pain. Like there are all these different ways that our lives are kind of like minimized and like subjugated and turned into us being basically just beings that work and beings that care for other people, right? And I think part of what she's doing and part of why it's crucial is that she's reminding us that that's not it, sis. Like that's not it. Like you're not just here to work. You're not just here to be a workhorse and a mule and take care of other people and be like a warrior and a fighter, you know, and a mama and somebody who just like makes the money and takes care of everybody. You're actually here to be human, and to be loved and honored and cherished and respected, right? And part of our work is recognizing that, understanding that, embodying that so that when we move through the world, we're moving from a space of I'm a person who deserves love, and who brings love to the space. I don't just bring myself as a worker bee and a caretaker, but I bring myself as a full human being who who deserves to be treated with care, just as any other human being, regardless of their race or gender, right? So I think she's basically humanizing us, right? She's giving us back that value that's taken from us within society. And she's telling us that it's something that there's a sense of like indoctrination that takes place. There's an internalized anti-Blackness that we all walk with, and there's internal work that we need to do. We need to also break down our own thought process and our own perspective in terms of like how we see ourselves in the world and what we see as our worth. So she's reminding us that it's not just about changing the system, but it's about changing ourselves, and that we won't be able to really change anything until we feel that change within us.
That's
And
right.
it's not a day by day thing. It's not something that just happens. It's like a process. So yeah, she laid it down. She woke it up. And it's like cliche, like RuPaul says, how you gonna love somebody else before you love yourself? It's kind of like cliche, but there might be some truth to that too, because if you don't see yourself as worthy of love, how do you give it to another person? Like, how do you know what that feels like to give it if you're not willing to receive it, right? So I don't know, I'm still processing, but yeah, her work is crucial. I feel like certain books by her should be read by everyone, whether woman, man, child, like certain ones, white, black, biracial, like Asian. Like I feel like everybody can learn something from every text that she's put out there.
I couldn't agree with you more. And as you were talking, I was thinking about how one thing that I feel like she made so clear is that part of the work is actually not doing physical work, right? Stepping back, taking some time to do the intellectual work, to sit with the feelings, to ponder the thoughts, to understand. And I just don't know anybody else that made any other Black feminist author before her that ever made me really think about how much of, like you said, we think of love as an action word. That's what we've been indoctrinated, right? I give love by showing love, by show love by doing, right? And also, but doing is sometimes actually being quiet and sitting back and being mindful and thoughtful and reflective. And I'm just so grateful that that really landed for so many of us, because it's a hard lesson to learn.
Yeah. Yeah. I think part of what guided her to that theory or understanding or notion is the fact that she was a very spiritual woman who's very much interested in like Buddhism and meditation, and the um the importance of being solitary, the importance of like silence and being alone and resting with yourself. She talks about that a lot in her work as well, and I think that's part of what like guided her, because there's this belief within a lot of traditions that if you just sit in silence and meditate, you'll actually understand that the answers to whatever questions you might have are already inside you. It's just about going to that really quiet place.
Yes.
So, and not confusing work and action as being the only thing that's worthy of your time,
Mm.
right? Sitting in stillness, being alone. She talks about being alone, feeling your loneliness, feeling your aloneness, right? And just listening to your own mind, your own heart, and understanding like materiality is not, capitalism has taught us that material things are more important
Right.
than, than actual like thoughts and emotions. So
Yeah, no, she's given
yeah,
us, she left us with so much. And so sticking with that theme,
she ate everything.
for real. But sticking with that theme of like, a lot of people, I think of aloneness and solitary, like there's such a negative connotation, particularly in our society, Western society, around those words.
Yeah.
And Bell has often talked about love in all meaningful relationships, right? Not just romantic bonds. So how has that way of framing love served us, especially as we're still in the midst of the global pandemic. As much as we want it to be over, it's very much still raging.
Uh, well, I think it served us in multiple ways, but the first way that comes to mind is the way she stresses the importance of community building. And how community, whether it be in the classroom, whether it be in the church setting, whether it be in the communities that we make, like in my book club, for instance, whether it be the roller rink, there's something very, very special and very important about us being with each other. Like, in addition to being alone, there's also being in community, and being able to bond with other people and work with other people and build and create with other people. And unfortunately, the being in the pandemic makes that hard, right? Because being with other people sometimes can jeopardize one's health and one's safety. So, it's a difficult thing, but I feel like this is just a chance for us to be more creative, right? This is just a chance for us to be more patient, more understanding, more intentional, more mindful, making sure that people are COVID free and have masks on if you're going to be with other folks, and also using digital spaces and virtual spaces to build community in that way, and just coming together with folks. So, you know, she gives us some tools, and she planted these seeds so long ago, and it's kind of nice to see and nice to experience the different ways that people have like used her work, and those seeds that she planted have like grown them into new books and films and ideas and theories and new ways of like looking at love, as a radical revolutionary project, Black love especially, and Black people loving each other especially. She talks about how in her book, Sisters of the Yam, she gives an example about how this one woman was working on pulling more love into her life. So when she walked out into the world and saw other Black people, she would make sure to greet them warmly and greet them with like love in her eyes. And she was doing that for like months. And she talks about how it like really like felt like it like changed her. It changed how she saw herself, and like it changed how she looked at the world, and certain people that she was seeing every day became to like show her love. So there was like this domino effect, right? And that's something I work on, and that's something I think about when I'm out in the world. So I feel like she gives us like little things that we can do, even within a pandemic, to show love and be with each other and just like create community, whether it be for 5 minutes with somebody on that you're riding next to on the bus, or whether it be monthly for a book club, or whether it be through social media, with posts and stuff. Like, I just think we have to be creative and think about what's the goal and what's the purpose for the action. And she says, if you're not practicing love, you're in debt, and that is deep. And I'm like, ooh, that scares me, Miss Hooks. Professor Hooks, that's a little bit scary for me.
Right.
Says that. But she sees it as that level of crucial, right? If you're not practicing love and you're not moving in love, you're moving in death. And I'm like, are those the only two options? Okay. I'm gonna try to move with that and see what happens and see what manifests. And usually what manifests is actually love and tenderness. And like, who doesn't want that? So
Yeah, no, thank you for reminding us there's always a small act. If you can eke it out, there's always a small thing that we can do to start the domino effect, right? And
yeah,
what a loving world it would be if everyone tried to just leave their house and move in love every day. Because man, we could use it. Man,
imagine.
it would be a different place. And that
Yeah.
actually brings me to the last question, which I have a lot of thoughts on, but I'm always interested to hear other folks' thoughts on. Final question. Bell Hooks said, love is profoundly political. So do you think this is missing in the current political conversation? Like, what is love's place in our political and social movements?
Mm.
Yeah. You can sit with
when I think about the idea of like political movements and social movements, it's unfortunate that what comes to mind are not the movements that really nurture life and honor life, marginalized lives, Black lives, queer lives, um, people that are undocumented. Like when I think about the political movements that are most prominent right now in 2022, those movements scare me, and they don't feel like love movements at all. They feel like hate movements. They feel violent. They feel scary. So, if there was a movement that centered love, a love ethic, right, as Bell Hooks says, a love praxis, a love politic, I would think Babylon would fall, like capitalism would crumble. People would recognize that the way the world is set up um, is unfair to many, and the people who are the most harmed within society, the people who are dealing with the violence of poverty and the violence of racism, sexism, would be placed center. Their needs would be made a priority. And those who have the most privilege and power and money would, first of all, give away a lot of their money, right? Like billionaires and millionaires would not exist. If we had a social movement that was the hierarchy in terms of social movements, and that movement centered love, I don't think we would have billionaires. Um, we wouldn't have people building spaceships to blow up the moon just for fun. We would have millionaires and billionaires who actually would try to house the homeless. We would have a healthcare system that was fair and balanced for everyone. We would have a system of education that didn't see critical race theory as a threat. We would talk about the history of all people, not just certain ones. A love movement would require a love ethic. It would require one of care, where everybody's humanity is recognized. So that would be amazing. That would be something I would love to see in my lifetime. And I'm a little cynical around that in this moment. I do have my days of cautious optimism. But in this moment, I'm feeling a little cynical because I really don't feel like love is something that's valued or even discussed within political spaces, even within our own organizing spaces, even within social justice spaces. I don't think that love is something that's discussed. I think justice is discussed. I think fairness is discussed. I think safety is discussed, but I don't think love is discussed. And another Bell Hooks quote, she says, "Love is justice." So maybe that's something we need to talk about more. All you organizers out there, if you're watching this, if you're an organizer, have you talked about love in your community meetings? Has it been discussed? I don't know. I wonder what type of shift would take place if that happened. But it's a scary idea, right? Because people don't want to get too soft. People don't want to get too tender, because it's like we're at war, like there's a battle going on, and people are afraid that if love is placed at the center, that might leave us vulnerable. So yeah, I could see why it might get confusing, but it's definitely worth discussion.
Yeah,
I hope that made sense, because I kind of went all over the place.
No, it makes sense, and I think what I ultimately what I heard too is that if all of those things were to take place, then there would be healing, right? And when
Yes.
love And in healing, there is an opportunity for reconciliation and a path forward, and whatever, different people use different language for a clean state, but a new birth, right? And I think that everything that is possible that I heard you talking about is possible if you're willing to go through the really hard work of the healing and the reconciliation and what needs to take place. Because if people, critical race theory wouldn't be a thing if we had a conversation in this country about healing and justice for our people, right? But we could be here all day. So I'm I'm very clear on what you said, and what I feel like I heard and most other people will hear is that a love-centered politic and a love-centered social justice movement seem impossible because we have a lot of healing work to do. And that's not what people want to lean into. It's easier to lean into not being, part of the solution and part of the problem. But I'm with you, Ola. And, my friend and my leader, Maurice Mitchell, talks a lot about being a disciplined
I love Maurice.
I love Maurice too. Shout out to you, Maurice. But when I talk to him, we do our check-ins sometimes and things are really rough, he talks about being a disciplined optimist. And when it gets really hard, I think about him, because that's a heavy burden, and it's easy to watch other people move through the world that way and be like, damn, I wish I could be like that. And it's a whole other thing to try to practice in these very dark times, but you can makes it a little bit easier if you're trying to move from a place of love, right? So.
Definitely. You just reminded me of something that Bell Hooks says. She says it's not impossible, it's just difficult.
That's right. And one of my favorite rappers, Jay-Z, says difficult takes a day, impossible takes a week. Okay, that's my mantra.
Yes, Brooklyn, come through with the Jay-Z quote. We love it.
Saying. So it's impossible takes a week. We'll get it done in maybe a couple weeks, Ola.
Yes.
So that being said, that was my last question. And again, I want to thank you so much for your time and being here with us on the front line. You, in the beginning, told us about all the wonderful things you're working on. So tell the people where to find you out on these internet streets, in Brooklyn. What's going on? What can we do?
Well, I'm coming to you live from Bed-Stuy, Brooklyn, the littiest part of Brooklyn. And if you want to check in with the Free Black Women's Library, if you want to find out about all of our events, our workshops, if you want to join our reading club, you can contact me through my website, thefreeblackwomanslibrary.com. And you can also follow me on Instagram at the Free Black Women's Library. I know it's long, but that's the full name, at the Free Black Women's Library. And yeah, check in with me. Join us for reading groups. We have a really good time. All are welcome. We're actually reading Bell Hooks right now. So yeah, get into it. Thank you for having me. This has been great.
Thank you for joining us on the front line. Thank you for giving our audience an opportunity to tap in. You guys, I hope you caught that. Friends, you can go to at the Free Black Women's Library and get in a Bell Hooks book club. So if any of this has piqued your curiosity, you want to dig in a little bit more, join our girl Ola over down to the library. Ola, thank you. Yeah, I did not know Brooklyn has little inter-Brooklyn wars about where's the littiest part of Brooklyn.
Yes, really? It happens, but people just need to admit that it's Bed-Stuy. We have Flatbush, Crown Heights, Fort Greene Park. It's Bed-Stuy. It's Bed-Stuy.
There's a comment that says Flatbush is the littiest. So before we
excuse me,
before we get
confused.
I'm a bridge and tunnel girl from Connecticut, so I'm not getting involved with y'all. I'm a straight up bridge and tunnel person, so I'm not getting in the Brooklyn wars. Good luck, Brooklyn. I love all parts of you. You've always been good to me. You've always been good to me, Brooklyn. Ola, thank you so much. We really appreciate you. Hope to see you again on the front line.
Awesome.
Thank you. Join us next Wednesday, February 16th at 7:00, where we'll be joined by Unique Gibson Jones, creator of Because of Them We Can, to talk about love and community. and every Thursday this month on Twitter at 3 p.m. for some exciting Twitter spaces and conversations. Thanks for joining us on the Frontline. And as always, we're so happy to see you and look forward to seeing you again soon.
The widespread assumption that ethical behavior takes the fun out of life is false. In actuality, living ethically ensures that relationships in our lives, including encounters with strangers, nurture our spiritual growth.